I'm studying the symptoms and the spaces that are left over as a byproduct of motorways in the city, specifically those that are along like obsolete rivers, railways, industrial quarters. And I'm interested in how this landscape development can impact the surrounding social structure. So as this case study, I'm studying Le Dahlman's project, which I think is an excellent example of an intervention like this.
The notion of the creation of dead space and then the kind of the consideration of how to use it is not a new one.
Right.
The phenomenon dates back to the early 70s when there was a movement called slope, which was space left over after planning.
Okay.
That was the whole idea is that infrastructure has been imposed on the land rather than integrated with it, which when you're out in the countryside doesn't really maybe matter a lot, although it can certainly kind of destroy some good links and some good vistas. But in the city, where it tends to hit a fairly complicated and historically established series of intersections of uses, that it tends to just drop on top of it, and therefore leaves a space not just underneath. We always think about the space left over on the planet doing just underneath, but if you look at what a freeway does when it comes in the city, because it is such an anathema to what's going on underneath, the space underneath tends to sort of grow. The dead space, because of the negative consequences of a freeway, the dead space tends to grow along kind of it's like almost like a slice in the living fabric of the city, and along the edge you kind of get the wound starting to try and heal. But what it does, that's a terrible analogy actually, but it actually creates a sort of a dead zone, which means either property that becomes disused or downgraded to the point that it has no real value, and therefore not very useful. And if it gets knocked down, it just becomes dead space. And cities have traditionally looked at this land as being throwaway land, cheap land, and therefore it typically gets to be used for the lowest common denominator, which is surface parking. Which mostly some of the parking areas under freeways. It's the lowest, and it's better than no use at all, but it's the lowest use that you can come to, really. Where projects have started to sort of say, well, what are the benefits of freeway? Of looking at it, flipping it around and saying, instead of it being horrible space under the freeway, look at the positives. One of the positives, when you're under the freeway, you can't see the freeway. But one of its biggest advantages is that it's very inexpensive. And so a classic example of, I would say, good use of freeway space might well be a place in Chicago, Stan Teichmann's school, ARC, much embarrassing. But basically, he did a public service kind of school of architecture. It's not an accredited program, but I've forgotten his damn name now.
That's enough.
It'll come, don't worry. But basically, just kind of created kind of a nice box and just tucked it under the freeway.
Okay.
It's actually visually very powerful. Well, I think when you drive along the surrounding freeways, just sort of see this pure space inserted under the kind of the snakiness of the thing.
Is this 94?
Yeah, you can see it.
Between here and
no, you have to go beyond.
Beyond.
Yeah, it's over by IIT.
Okay.
And I've been trying to encourage groups in town here to think where you need a blank box, that could actually be big box development actually, but I'm thinking more things like the ballet, which is actually you just do require just a big elegant box. But land under freeways is cheap, and therefore the building is inexpensive. The noise doesn't matter because you can insulate for sound, and you still have lots of very inexpensive parking around. So there are a lot of development opportunities for real buildings up there. Probably the best example that we have right now in the city of that kind of development is the public market, which is built on land right next to the freeway.
Right.
And it basically therefore takes it's in the third ward, which is very expensive land, but because it's right next to the freeway, it was much cheaper, and they could then spill the parking and tuck it underneath. The other big advantage, in addition to being very cheap, is of course that you are right by a freeway, which means you've got big signs that you have tremendous visibility. So there are advantages to freeway. So we've done a few studios here. Moselle has done a couple of studios here where she's kind of basically looked at residual splits, what you can do with it. And instead of it being more about building space, she's tended to look at it more in the way of kind of event space, art events, collaborative events, creating space. And this is where the La Dolman one takes that into architecture, basically creating space that is sufficiently defined that it is attractive to realize that it's event space, but sufficiently open-ended that it will allow for multiplicities of uses. And that's essentially why the Marsupio Bridge has been successful. I mean, first and foremost, it's a connection between neighborhoods. So it basically links part of the city, but it does it in a way that uses high-quality architecture and design to send messages to people that this is a good experience, this is a rich experience, and it's a valued experience. And that architecture is very important in doing that, the messages that it sends. It's not just like a kind of a caged-in walkway that you sometimes see over a freeway that looks like it's there for just necessity. It looks like a horrible experience to walk through this cage. It instead creates a kind of a high-quality experience that says it's actually pleasurable and we value this connection. That's where the value, that's the important shift. It's not just joining A and B, it's the way you do it, it's the experiential quality. But then you enable the kind of some spaces, a space at the end, to be sufficiently open-ended and designed that it's obviously for something, but not for one thing in particular, which means you can show movies, you can have dance performances, you can have musicians down there. There's just kind of a different range of opportunities. So that's a very good example of an open-ended way. We had some other ideas. The difference between that and freeways are obviously that this one is tucked right into a neighborhood, a residential neighborhood, so people walk there. It's a little more difficult to do the kind of smaller interventions at the bigger scale of freeways, simply because, first of all, they pretty much killed the neighborhood life around them. There's not much happening there. People aren't going to walk to it. And secondly, just the whole scale of things is much more difficult. The Brady Street connection is just much easier because the scale is human scale, and the river is attractive. There isn't that sea of concrete around. Which is not to say that the lessons learned from that can't be applied at a different scale elsewhere.
Do you recall what the site was prior to the development of that? I just moved here last August, so I've been here for just a little over a year now.
Which site?
The La Dolman site. What level of condo development had already begun to populate the area where the bridge occurs now? Was the bridge sort of a dark, dormant place, simply with, Water Street passing underneath?
Holden was always a noisy bridge because of metal panels, but there was nothing underneath. And the space under where the bridge hits the abutment was just dead space, just overgrown planting. Development started. The first real development down there, because I can remember it when it really was just disused back street into the city, and there were big old cans of like toxic waste down. It was just horrible. And there was a warehouse, Gimbel's warehouse, quite a nice brick building, which is now probably the worst piece of architecture on there. The Brewers Point or something it's called. It's that kind of horrific one that looks like a bad hotel next to the Lakeshore Brewery, just west of the Lakeshore Brewery. And that was a really kind of a nice old brick building, and they kind of totally screwed that up.
I know the one you're talking about, yeah.
So that was about 15 years ago, and then the Lakeshore Brewery came along, and then city development basically came up with a plan for the whole area, laid it out. Something became clear to everybody here that development along the lakes, the rivers, is actually kind of good. So by 10 years ago, it was almost built out, and then it was then that
bridge
the value and the connection came thereafter.
Okay.
Still work to do there, obviously, because the Galoon Tannery site is ready for development. I've reviewed 4 schemes for that, and it's a really difficult site to get going. There's another one now that's just not working.
Is that the site itself, or levels of politics within the city, or what's the kind of
Site.
Okay.
It's long and thin, with about 20-foot drop, and it's incredibly hard to get the level of development on there without a great deal of expensive infrastructure and underground parking. Really tough site to develop.
Okay.
But I've seen Shields come up with a scheme for it. Continuum come up with a scheme for it. Happy George Haynes, and Engberg Anderson. They're all quite good. There's one out there now which just looks to me like they just want to kind of blacktop everything and convert the existing building to apartments, which won't work because that building isn't convertible. We've seen enough studies now that it's really hard to convert a building that's got structural problems, and that one has.